everyone, and welcome to part 2 of this 5-part series on how to start your landscape design. Before we get started, if you haven't yet watched the first part in this series, reviewing the intentions and purpose of each space of your property, you can find the link in the description below or in the title card above to watch it right now. Today we will be focusing on the necessary information required for proper placement of all the activities that you came up with in part 1. As we go through this part's inquiry, please keep in mind all of the activities you came up with, and you will begin to see how easily the proper placement of each activity will be. So let's get started. Before we begin placing activities, we must first find out what type of land we're dealing with. I call this part the trifecta of landscape design. The first step is to identify your slopes. You may have one or more, and they may be steep or shallow. Either way, determining your slope is critical. You should not neglect even the shallowest of slopes because it will give you 2 very important pieces of information. Number 1, which way will the water drain? And number 2, where are the dry spots and where are the wet spots? And why these are important is because you wouldn't want to put your pathway or patio in a wet spot, and you also wouldn't want to put a plant that needs good drainage in a wet spot, or a plant that likes wetter soils in a dry spot. So begin to observe your space that you are designing and determine if there is a slope. Water is very transparent, and I don't mean that literally. What I mean is that water will drain even if the slope is 0.5%. It doesn't need much of a slope for water to move, so don't underestimate your slopes. If it seems like your yard is flat, do a walk around and the squish test. So as you walk, check to see if your feet feel squishy soils or hard soils. A squishy soil could mean that there's some standing water, while a hard surface or a hard soil could mean that it's fairly dry. So the next step is to determine your soil profiles. Determining your soil is critical because it'll give you yet another set of important data. Number 1, where your water will drain and where it will be stagnant. Number 2, what plants you can plant where. You may or may not know that certain plants require lots of drainage while other plants are tolerant of less drainage and more wet, boggy soils. Either of this information will give you an insight into what kind of plants you can plant in your landscape. Soil quality is one of the most important aspects of your garden, and soils are very diverse and complex. And although we need to consider alkalinity and acidity, for this exercise, we will stick to the basics. Generally, there are 3 basic types of soil. There's sandy soil, a loamy soil, and a clay soil. Sandy soil will drain water really quick and provides very little nutrients. This is good for plants that prefer dry feet and perform much like a desert or a drought-tolerant plant. And it does really well in poor soils. A loamy soil is one that takes a little bit longer to drain and provides a very good amount of nutrients to plants. These soils are the most desired. Clay soils are hard and barely porous. These could take hours to drain and provide a very rich amount of nutrients. They're kind of like nutrient overload, but very few plants enjoy this type of environment. Now we're going to look at how to determine what kind of soil type you've got. So what you're going to do is you're going to dig a hole, and you could use a hand trowel or a shovel. Doesn't really matter. I would start with a test hole that's about maybe 6 inches in diameter. I wouldn't go any bigger, and about 10 inches in depth. I wouldn't really go any deeper or any shallower than that. And what you're testing for is how quickly will the water drain. So that's right. When you dig the hole, you're going to take the material out and you're going to pour in some water. Now, where you want the test holes is where you suspect the soils may be different. So where this could be is in a sunny spot versus a shady spot, the top of a slope versus the middle of the slope versus the bottom of a slope. So you could have up to 6 or 7 different holes, different test holes in your landscape area where you're designing. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to pour that water in there, and then you're going to time it. So is the water draining in less than half an hour? Is the water draining at about an hour's rate? Or is the water still there after an hour and even close to 2? As you may have guessed it, the first one would be sand, then it would be loam, and then it would be clay. Another way you can test this is by just taking a sample and squishing it in your hands. If it's squishy, like how you used to play with Play-Doh or clay, and you can mold it and it becomes malleable, you can turn it into shapes, that's clay. If you've got something that you can squish and it kind of crumbles like cake, don't eat it, but it's likely that you've got loam. And if you've got a squish test where you can barely get a shape, like it's just crumbling and nothing is sticking, you guessed it, you've got sand. Okay, so that's how you determine what kind of soil type you've got. And then when you've determined this, map it out onto your plan. Your job is to create an inventory of what soil is in your garden. You can always amend soils. Yes, this is true. And doing it in a way that works long term requires amending to take place over an extended period of time. In some cases, it could take years to amend soil. For now, the most cost-effective and respectful approach to the environment is to work with what you've got. Remember, nature always wins, and I prefer to always work with nature rather than against it. This aspect is designed to determine your sun patterns. Determining your sun pattern is critical because it will give you yet another 2 critical pieces of the puzzle. Number 1, where your soil will dry out faster and slower. And number 2, which plant you can plant where. The provision of sun is the 3rd part of the trifecta. Plants all over the world have adapted themselves to the amount of sun or shade that they receive. Many plants love the sun and will only thrive there, and many plants love the shade and will only thrive there. It is critical to know these locations in your landscape such that you can choose the best location for your plants. Now, it's also valuable to understand microclimates in this particular context. So out in nature, the temperatures are regulated by the ground cover, and the ground cover could include many different things. It could include a river or a creek, a forest, or a meadow. In the city, the temperatures are at the effect of many, many more materials. In addition to everything I've said in a smaller scale, other materials could include stone walls, concrete walls, stucco walls, shingles, etc. It could even include metal and metal surfaces. Temperatures are also determined by the color of a wall. So notice if your house is a light color or a dark color. Bright houses will reflect more sunlight, causing a warmer microclimate, while the darker walls will cause a cooler microclimate. All of these are important to note. So now go ahead and determine the locations of your sun in your landscape. Take your time and do not rush this. Track an entire day from morning to night. What you're looking for is the amount of hours of sun that a particular spot is getting. And you can map this out on a piece of paper and work with it throughout the day. So what you want to track is, are you getting more than 8 hours of sun? Are you getting from 6 to 8 hours of sun? Are you getting from 4 to 6 hours of sun, 2 to 4 hours of sun, or 0 to 2 hours of sun? Hey, if you like what you're seeing in this video, give it a thumbs up. You can also hit the subscribe button if you want to get alerts on when more videos like this are coming up, especially part 3, which is coming up later this week. Great work, everyone. You are on your way to designing that perfect landscape for you and your family. You can already begin to see, based on the work that we did today, that the activities you wrote down that you would love to have in your yard to be able to do, that you discovered in part 1, are already naturally lending themselves to the places where the slopes are, where the wet and dry spots are, or where the sunny and shady spots are. The valuable lesson here is to allow the perfect location and design to naturally emerge based on what you already have. Thank you so much for doing all this work. Join me next time, Thursday, when we will begin to take the lessons from part 1 and part 2 and begin to come up with a draft concept for your perfect landscape design. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Take care, be well, and stay safe. Until next time, bye for now.